Around a third of the estimated 5,000 European jihadists who went to Syria and Iraq have returned to Europe, and some may have orders to conduct terror attacks, according to a report that's come to light. British police said counter-terrorism officers arrested a man at Heathrow Airport this week. His arrest was linked to conflict overseas. Security services have put the current threat level of international terrorism in Europe at severe. WION's Mandy Clark sent this report from London.
The return of these jihadists is partly because of the operation in Mosul, according to the report. The US-backed coalition forces are driving the Islamic State group from territories in Iraq and parts of Syria. 15 to 20% of Europeans have died on the battlefields in Syria and Iraq, and around 30% have returned. The remaining 50%, roughly 2,500 European fighters, are staying in the war zone.
The European Union report says there are two types of terrorists that are coming back to Europe. Ones that are disillusioned with the movement and want to move back to relative safety, and others who've been given specific missions to commit terrorism acts on European soil.
The attacks in Paris last November that killed 130 people across the city was staged by Islamic State fighters who had returned from Syria. Even women and children born and raised in the Islamic State territory could pose a security threat because they may have been radicalized. Many of those returning fighters have been convicted and are serving prison sentences. Others are being monitored, and some are free in their communities. Mandy Clark, WION, London.
The European Union's police agency Europol said Islamic State attackers are shifting their focus on softer, more random targets in an effort to intimidate the public, and they retain the ability to strike anywhere in Europe. Have a look at this report.
The European police agency Europol has warned that jihadi attackers could resort to car bombs and suicide strikes, common in Syria and Iraq. Europol's counter-terrorism center said the continent faced threats from armed and networked groups and also lone wolf attacks. It warned that given the reverses suffered in the battlefields of Syria and Iraq, foreign fighters would try and enter European countries at a higher rate. The Europol report says the jihadists were not necessarily religious or strict in their practice of Islam. Rather, they are more likely to have criminal backgrounds. They could be suffering from feeling of humiliation and discrimination, or even have mental health issues. Europol warned that France would be high on the list of targets for jihadis because of the economic isolation of Muslims there and its involvement in Algeria, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. It said that the Islamic State is very conscious of history and the historical French role in ending the Ottoman Empire and the abolition of the Caliphate. Bureau Report, WION.
Let's introduce our panel to you. Sanjay Kapoor, editor of Hard News magazine, somebody who goes quite regularly to Syria, is going to join us, and we're going to get perspective from him on South Asia. But we also have George Hale, investigative journalist in Germany, somebody who actually knows this territory quite well. He's regularly in touch with people inside the Caliphate, which is quite important, and with smugglers who bring people out. He's spoken to many families of ISIS fighters who've returned and continues to cooperate with his colleagues in Sweden, Belgium and Portugal. So we're going to be getting that European perspective from him. For American perspective, we're going to Glenn Carl, a regular at WION, American writer and former intelligence officer, has written at quite some length about that ideology and terrorism at large. I'm going to go to George Hale first. He's our guest from Europe. Sir, I'd like to start by asking you, do you think this event now, the return of the 1,500 European boys back to Europe, does that increase the threat of terror attacks in Europe, or does it curb that threat?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think it's quite fair if you say there is a fair chance that it increases the threat of terror within Europe, because you have people who are traumatized, who are trained on weapons and who have been in combat situations. You have people who may have come here back to Germany or to other European countries on a mission, but you also have people who came back maybe because it was too dangerous for them there, but they still are part of this movement of the Salafi ideology, and therefore they are quite willing to act for them. And you have regularly videos showing up or messages on Telegram channels, for example, where they call upon their followers in Europe to do something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be related with explosives. They say, take a kitchen knife and kill people on the streets. So I think it's really fair to say the threat level has increased in Europe with this wave of jihadi foreign fighters coming back from Syria and Iraq.
I'd also like to then ask you, how should European Union be going about this threat, as it were? Is there going to be a collective strategy? Is there going to be more information sharing? Because there have been lots of concerns reported by journalists like yourself and others that the EU countries aren't sharing information when it comes to the threat of ISIS. What's going to be the strategy? What should it be for the EU?
Yeah, that's a crucial point you mentioned there. In fact, that is a big problem. As you're aware, the European Union consists out of 27 countries, and my home country, Germany, consists of 16 states, federal states, which have their own law and their own police. So it's kind of hard to synchronize the framework, the legal framework. But you could already see some improvements. There is information sharing in real time on a police and on an intelligence level within the EU countries and also with Norway and Switzerland. So this information sharing problem, as I would call it, it is addressed, but still there is a lot to be improved. But I think another point is it's not only about police and intelligence work. What you need to do is you need to set up a framework how to reintegrate people. If you have traveled to Syria, it's not illegal. So in Germany, they would probably not arrest you if they can't prove that you have been a fighter or that you have received military training.
Right.
So we have to look at those people and offer them some kind of psychological assistance.
Absolutely. If the framework certainly is needed, and we talk about that in a bit, and the problem of how these young people aren't perhaps as well integrated, and what policies should be in place in European countries like yours, Germany, perhaps even France and others. But for the moment, I'm going to go to our American guest, Glenn Carl. Glenn, thanks very much for being with WION yet again. I like to ask you, when we talk about information sharing, it can't just be between European countries. America, of course, is a hub of a lot of this intelligence that comes out. What sort of intelligence, what sort of information is shared with EU currently? And is that going to improve or not? What's your, what can you add here?
Well, I suppose perfection being impossible to attain, I mean, there's always going to be room for improvement in mechanisms and procedures and so on. That said, though, in my career, which was, I think, completely typical, and particularly after the attacks of September 11, the cooperation among among intelligence services internationally, law enforcement services, domestic intelligence services, has been intense and quite open. So there will be, we can predict this, there will be other attacks, and then the fact-finding investigations will find frictions and inefficiencies. That said, though, overall the cooperation among intelligence agencies is intense and very good. I don't see that as the real challenge. Mm-hmm. The challenge simply is that you have numbers of individuals in, as the gentleman before me said, 27 states, just to take the EU, and it is very difficult from a resource perspective and then a technical operational perspective to be aware of what they're doing at all times. And the critical problem has always been for Europe and the United States,
right,
with
Glenn,
individuals like as we're speaking about, is to know when they will actually do something. Even if you know they're bad, and frequently we do, it's hard to know when they will act, and that's the big challenge.
I'd like to ask you, the fact that these 1,500 Europeans have returned back home, does that also increase the threat of terror attacks in your assessment, also in the United States?
Oh, I suppose somewhat more than marginally. The answer would be yes. I mean, if there are 1,600 jihadists, individuals who are willing to go and give their lives in combat for Allah, as they imagine it, who are now elsewhere, the places where they are need to pay attention, definitely. And it is easier to go from Germany or Lithuania or Austria, choose the country in Europe, to the United States than it is from Syria. So, or what passes for Syria today. So in that sense, yes, it is a greater challenge, yes.
All right, and how to deal with that challenge is going to be the next part of the debate, but I'm going to go to Mr. Kapoor now. Sir, you've been to Syria several times. We've got the perspective from Europe and America and how that cooperation should be and what it essentially means for Europe and America is more threat. I'd like to now get some perspective as far as South Asia is concerned. A lot of South Asians from countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Maldives have gone to ISIS-held areas. From India, what we pick up from intelligence officers is that at least 60 Indians have gone the other side, and there's a constant effort that the agencies in India are making to bring them back. What does this mean when it comes to South Asia? Do you think it's going to dissuade or encourage the South Asians who've gone to ISIS areas?
You must recognize that there are people from South Asia who have gone to Syria, but most of them have gone from Pakistan. So all the intel that you may be getting from there is about a larger presence from Pakistan and somewhat from Bangladesh. Indians are only a handful, and many of them are in touch with their families, and there is an attempt on the part of the intelligence agencies to get them back. But having said that, the fact that the Islamic State is on the retreat in Mosul and to some extent they're about to, whatever presence there was of Islamic State in Aleppo, that is likely to end. It is going to be discouraging for new recruits to go there. My information coming out from Syria suggests that the Western intelligence agencies are in touch with the Syrian counterparts, and they are trying to tell the Syrians that, look, it will be good if you can hold them back. So Syria is seen as some kind of a fly trap which will hold back many of these European jihadis to return back to their country. So this is an exercise which has been going on for quite a while, but we must recognize that the foreign terrorists are largely from Arab world. They are from, the maximum are from Tunisia, they are from some from Saudi Arabia, and they would also go back. So there are fears that when they go back they may get violent.
Right, and that is something that we are discussing.
A possibility that they may just like to immerse themselves.
Absolutely. We don't actually know, but the consensus that is emerging on this debate and what we're hearing from our correspondents across is that this increases the threat, perhaps also because you don't really know how these people will act now that they're back, and if they do, when will they, as Glenn Carl was mentioning. But what is it that drives someone to take up arms for jihad? Is it sectarian violence? Is it sectarian violence clubbed with radicalization? Of course, reasons are many. Have a look at this report that's come from the Middle East.
Walid Ismail was a bakery worker who joined the Islamic State to become a jihadist for a mere $400 a month.
Daesh gave me 500,000 dinars per month to hold a machine gun and stand guard on a street. I went to the mosque and they told me to wait, and then a mullah called Abu Mustafa told me to declare allegiance, and then someone called Abu Ibrahim gave me a rifle and uniform and told me to stand guard in the street, saying this is my job.
Ismail and another described how Islamic State transformed them into jihadists through promises and threats. They also said that unjust treatment of the Sunni community by the Shia-led government in Iraq and its armed forces played a major role. Ismail said Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi had wide appeal when he walked into a Mosul mosque in broad daylight 2 years ago and declared large parts of Iraq and Syria a caliphate 6 years after Al-Qaeda was driven underground.
We love them because they relieved us from the oppression of the Shiites who branded all the Sunnis as terrorists. We love them because they rid us of them.
It was a combination of the promise of a better future and threats to them and their family that saw many joining terrorist outfits. In the case of Hazim Saleh, his wife asked him not to join the Islamic State.
She told me not to go with them, but I asked her if I don't join them, how can we live? They closed my shop, they hurt me. The Islamic State dash, there was a lack of work and poverty, so most people joined because of that. They threatened to make my 14-year-old son wage holy war in order to pressure me.
The arrested men now face an uncertain future. When sufficient evidence is gathered against them, they will be put on trial. Bureau Report, WION.
And ISIS isn't just looking at adults, they're also looking at children. Catch them young, train them young to be jihadis. Documents and books found in classrooms in an Iraqi town captured from the Islamic State reveal a systematic effort to poison the minds of children. Have a look at this report.
Empty classrooms in Arbajia, a neighborhood in Mosul, gave an insight into the plan of the Islamic State to spread its dangerous ideology among children. The book found in these classrooms included many pictures of rifles and weapons and taught children how to spell out words like caliphate, Baghdadi and rockets.
This is the curriculum used by the Islamic State to teach children between the 1st and 6th grades. They want to imprint on these children's minds the ideas of jihad, of crooked jihad. The jihad which means killing your brothers, killing your fellow countrymen, killing those who believe in a different ideology or religion. They would teach us about bullets and how to slaughter and kill others. They would ask us to add dead body plus dead body, bullet plus bullet. They would teach us how to slaughter.
The Islamic State is known to have raised a force of 60 young children called Cubs of the Caliphate. Indoctrinated to hate their enemies, they were trained for suicide missions. In August this year, a 12-year-old boy reportedly affiliated to the Islamic State blew himself up in Gaziantep, Turkey, killing 54 and injuring more than 70. More recently, a 15-year-old boy was arrested by Kurdish forces as he attempted to blow himself up outside a football stadium in Kirkuk. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, let's go to our return to our panel. I'm going to go to our German guest, Mr. Hale first, investigative journalist. You've spoken to people Europeans who've returned from ISIS. You have connections in the Caliphate, as you say. Give us a sense of, we now understand perhaps a little bit why people in the Arab countries are joining the ISIS, but why are the Europeans joining the ISIS? And what sort of an insight have you got after speaking to people who've returned?
There's for sure different reasons for joining the Caliphate, but a big group of the European people who left, there's also young people younger than 30 years, many in their early 20s, and they left because it was an opportunity to escape their lives here in Europe. Sometimes they have been involved in street criminality and drug abuse. A lot of them have a migration background, as we call it here. So they were born to, for example, Turkish parents. And they were never very well integrated into the European societies. And I think in France, it's even a bigger problem than here in Germany, but still this problem exists. And so if you don't have a perspective of a good life and of a good job and the opportunity to find a family and have a decent life, then it is interesting if somebody comes and offers you a life down there in the Caliphate where you can have four women, you can get a job, a weapon, you have some status, you are not discriminated against. I mean, there's a lot of bad things you could say about ISIS, but they are not really racist, for example. Therefore, this is an opportunity which seemed attractive to a lot of people. If they come back now, then it is for reasons that this dream or this opportunity didn't turn out. They were confronted with extreme violence. People are suffering from the air campaigns from the Russians and the international coalition, and therefore a lot of people just came back because they were disillusioned. So they are not here on a plan. But still, that doesn't mean that they are not dangerous, and that doesn't mean that there are not some people who were sent back with a mission. And apart from those people who went down to the caliphate, we also have those people who want to go there, but it's not possible to go there anymore, and the ISIS actually calls upon them to stay within Europe and to commit an action here. So that's another group which should raise our concern.
Right, so it's one part of it is the stardom and the heroism that perhaps is connected to brand ISIS and what the ideology that they're selling, the ideas that they are propagating. But certainly that isn't the complete story, Mr. Hill. Would you not agree? There are also internal issues within Europe's society, as my colleague Sanjay, Mr. Kapoor was talking, that it in certain areas is not as huge a problem, and luckily so far it's not been as big a problem in India as perhaps it's been in Europe. So what is it that in terms of policy the European countries need to bring in order to integrate such restless youth more?
Absolutely, you're right. This is a long-term project, as I would call it. We have to make sure in Europe, we actually produced those people. The European societies produced people that were willing to leave their families, their home countries, in order to go down into a war zone because they thought they would have a better life there. So therefore, we need to look on those people who radicalize them and recruit them. We need to stop them. We need to work with police and intelligence on them. But we also have to offer another perspective to those people from young people that don't feel integrated here. We need to offer them jobs. We need to offer them respect and a role within our societies. That's definitely a thing we need to do. And there's a colleague of mine, a German scientist, he said, Salafis are the better social workers in Germany. And I think there's a lot true about that. We need to be the better social workers than the radicalizers from ISIS or Salafi groups. And therefore, we need to reach out to them. We need to offer opportunities, and we need to work on a society which is more just and equal and gives everybody a fair chance.
So you're right there. A lot of extremism essentially happens under the garb of charity, whether it is, if you look at ISIS or even if you look in India's neighborhood, a lot of terror groups essentially claim to be charitable organizations. That is essentially how they try and gain legitimacy amongst the people that they are living with. Let me go to Glenn Carl with that. Glenn, what is the American perspective when it comes to integration? We've heard what Donald Trump, the president-elect, said during his campaign about all Muslims. He wanted to block the entry of all Muslims. Now, with him winning the elections, which way do you think America is going to go? Is it going to go towards integration, or is it going to go towards perhaps a more fair politics?
I was hoping you had asked me about the causes of radicalism, because that's probably an easier one to address than speaking about my current country's recent election.
You can answer both. Glenn, feel free to answer both.
Well, I'll try the harder one first, then talk about the American election. I have found, and I think historians and people who watch politics should find, that we need to take people at their words, and that's things that sound foolish, said by public figures, we tend to dismiss if we find it foolish, and that is frequently an error. So I find it potentially tragic already, frankly, very harmful to American and international interests and comity. What has happened as a result of the rhetoric of the campaign and from Donald Trump and his supporters. I find it almost inconceivable that he will, and he's backed off from a total ban on Muslims. However, simply the rhetoric itself is chilling, alienating, and polarizing. And I anticipate that there will be measures against Muslim males from predominantly Muslim societies or something to that effect. And now that's a broad, crazy statement almost, but that's in line with walking back to some achievable, if harmful, step taken by American officials. Will this happen? I don't know. Even if it does not, already the debate has been framed in ways that you and I are talking about right now. And that itself alienates and harms American interests, because you don't tar 1.4 billion people, of whom several thousands are trying to kill you, without having harmful consequences to yourself.
I'm going to go back to Sanjay Kapoor. Sanjay, I think it's time that we talk a little bit more about South Asia and dwell upon that more. I know I asked you that question earlier and you did answer it, but I do want to get an understanding from you, since you've been on the ground there. The fact that 1,500 Europeans have gone back home, what does that do to the psyche of South Asians there? I know it's not in that sense one thing, but still sort of connected in more ways than it would be to say the Arab terrorists. What do you think they're thinking at this point? Do they think they're perhaps thinking of packing up their bags and coming home? Or they're thinking, let's pack up our bags, go home and conduct some terror attacks? You've been on the ground, you've spoken to the establishments in several of these countries. How would you analyze that?
So before I get to this, I just wanted to mention something that the time and again the European security agencies talk about 1,500 going back and 50, 60 hardened terrorists being there. It also feeds Islamophobia, both in Europe as well as United States of America. And we don't, I mean, there have been two major terror attacks in France and in Brussels. So that is an issue, but I think the European security agencies have to be mindful of what is the quality of people who are returning, whether they will actually cause violence or won't cause violence, whether they can be integrated or not integrated. Because what we are seeing is the consequences of their analysis is impacting results in, for example, the United States of America. And you having a world where there is no patience for the other, there's no patience for the Muslims. So it's a very troubling situation. But coming back to your question, there is a certain kind of hierarchy that used to prevail in Islamic State. You had the you had the Europeans coming in who were the Brahmins there, and the fact that they are willing to go back, it will be, I think, for the South Asians, there will be a reason to pack their bags faster and leave faster. So what we are seeing is a certain amount of unwinding of the Islamic State that we are seeing at the moment. And if Mosul also falls, there will be less territory that they will be occupying. There will be some territory in Syria that they will be holding for the time being. But there would be a fast, you can say, reduction of the influence as well as people that they would be, supporting the Islamic State cause. But I've been talking with the Iranians who watch Islamic State very closely, and they think that even though they may go back, they are not going to share the ideology right away. And especially the hardened variety would not give up so easily, and they would be susceptible to any kind of instruction that may come from the headquarters, wherever it is located, of Mr. Baghdadi or whomsoever is the handler. They think that it is a threat which will loom even if geographically they are ousted.
Right, Sanjay. I also wanted to get some perspective from you again on the South Asians, because based on the revelations made by some of the South Asians who'd gone and then returned, they'd said that they essentially weren't treated very well by the ISIS in the Arab world, and they were thought of as weak and useless, and they were given petty tasks. So do you think that is going to sort of encourage the South Asian boys to return home? Many have returned after that, actually, and now with the Mosul capture happening, what do you think? What sort of a role would that play?
No, as I was telling you, there was a hierarchy where you had the Europeans who were occupying right at the top. They were paid better. They were given better apartments to stay whenever, in Mosul or in other places. And after that, the Indians were generally told that they're not good fighters. They could do menial jobs, and that is exactly what they were doing. And some of them actually saw action and they got hurt in the process. They have returned since then. But you look at the nature of the entire call that was given, the ideology the Islamic State represents. As soon as the caliphate was announced, it became the responsibility of all God-fearing Muslims to go and protect and support that. And that is why a lot of people actually paid heed, even if they may not have gone, but they thought that their salvation actually lay in trying to help the Islamic State build into an entity where the interests of the Muslims could be looked after. So there were well-meaning people who had gone. They were not all criminals. I mean, you look at the profile of many Indians who have gone. There were some of them were IT professionals who were helping them out in, when it came to multiplying their message through social media. Or there were others who were well-educated. You didn't have criminals and you didn't have the underclass or the rough variety who went there. Most of them were people who believed in Allah, and they thought that they would probably create a world where there would be equality and there would be no injustice. The reason why many people from, some of them from India or from Pakistan actually gravitated towards Islamic State, because they thought there would be equality and there would be no harm that would visit to them, and they could live with dignity. But surely, it's a different world when you have so much of attrition which you have to face every day.
I want to talk a little bit about the ideology of it all and then come to the final word, and that bit about Islamic State ideology, that it's spreading and it wants to continue to spread, is the biggest fear, and it's reached as far back as India. The Indian officials think that essentially is the basic problem that they've got to fight. They've started lots of programs where they're essentially online checking what sort of ideology is ISIS trying to spread and how can they counter it. So countering that ideology. Keeping that in mind, I want to go back to Mr. Hale and ask you, sir, about your relationship, which is Europe, Germany's relationship with the United States, keeping in mind that President-elect Donald Trump would perhaps be, and most likely he would be the next president. How would Europe and America come together in fighting ISIS? Because there are many issues that Europe and America won't see eye to eye as foreign policy experts say in a Trump presidency. I'm asking you that because it seems that the Islamic heart is, I beg your pardon, Islamic State is trying to win as many hearts as they can or convert as many minds as they can through their propaganda. But it seems that the free world, so to say, Europe, America, don't seem to be standing close together. Your perspective?
I think when it comes to combating terror, for example, here in Europe, the relationship with the American friends and allies are just perfect. I mean, we get tipped off by American intelligence regularly about terrorist attacks that are planned here in Europe and Germany especially. So when it comes to saving lives, the capabilities of the NSA are really working also for the good of Europe. But if it comes to countering terrorism in the Islamic world, and especially in Syria and in Iraq, there is different roles, I would guess. Europe is not that keen on the statements. I mean, we heard in the campaign that people were talking about carpet bombing Syria, and I don't think that most of Europeans would agree that that would be helpful in combating Islamic State and its ideology, because you might kill some of the terrorists, but you would probably also produce more of them by killing mothers and fathers and innocent people. Therefore, it definitely needs military power, and the US has the greatest military on earth, but it also needs soft power. It needs people who would rebuild those states, who would help to build just societies. A big problem in Iraq, for example, is the problems between the Shia and the Sunni population, and therefore you would need good governance, you would need help and advice and consultancy, and also money to rebuild those countries. And I think that's a part where Europe could play its role. And I can't see in the future, but I think we will see some problems between European governments and the Trump government, but I can't specify on that.
So while there will be cooperation when it comes to intelligence, in terms of broader strategy, when it would be about dealing with the problem at large, then there would be differences. I want to bring in Glenn Carl here. Glenn, what do you make of that? Are we going to see carpet bombing of Syria? Would you say that is some sort of a solution? Or would that make the problem worse?
Well, of course, making it worse doesn't in any way convey the catastrophic consequences that such a foolish moronic action would have. I mean, I'll put it in American context. This is something that Americans should be able to grasp easily, and everyone should grasp. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, population 3 or 4 million. There are thousands of criminals here who endanger my life. If the decision were made, well, we have to take out the criminals and we're going to carpet bomb the place, and my city of 4 million people were largely destroyed, what consequences would that have? Maybe we killed 275 of the 4,000 criminals.
Right,
we're
Glenn,
targeting.
but the fact of the matter is, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the fact of the matter is that President-elect Donald Trump has made very aggressive statements. A lot of people who voted for Trump, one of the planks was that there's a power vacuum in the world because America has not been playing a leadership role when it comes to the world, and they think that Donald Trump would.
Well, they do think that, and strength is an easy thing to project, and it's easy to knock things down. I do believe, if there's any silver lining, that many of the things Trump says, he says for effect rather than actually having any substantive intention behind them or conviction, and that he will seek some sort of steps to take. But as soon as he's briefed for 5 minutes on the complexity of the problem, you realize that there are no forces on the ground and no forces that could be put on the ground, short of American forces, that can do the job effectively, and that air power is insufficient. And it can destroy, but not win a victory. And in America, short of making what passes for Syria a de facto colony forever, which we experienced how well that went in Iraq just a few years ago, there is no solution for American ground forces, really. So I don't anticipate that we will see carpet bombing or any other step. And one last comment, I'm sorry, to say Obama hasn't been leading this is one of the tropes, certainly in American political discourse, with respect to Syria at least. And I find this inaccurate, because sometimes it takes more courage and more leadership to realize what cannot be done and how to do things. And the goal is to eliminate ISIS, but you have to be able to do it in a way that doesn't destroy an entire civilization and create worse problems. And I would argue Obama has taken a strategic view of what American national vital interests are and how to pursue them at the lowest cost to all.
All right, Glenn, it seems that a lot of Americans who voted for Donald Trump didn't agree with that analysis. Let's bring in a quick final word from all our guests. And my question to all of you is, one, what should your specific regions be planning? How should they be preparing to deal now with what we're witnessing, the return of the young men and women who'd gone to join the ISIS? And Mr. Hale, first you, sir. How should the region be preparing? What should be the first few steps they should be taking in order to deal with the return?
We need a full-scale approach. We already have 1/3 of the German foreign fighters that have returned. We need to work with police and the intelligence services. They need to be watched. They need to our services need to cooperate with other countries, especially European neighbor countries. But we would also have to tackle the problem on a different scale. Civil society has to reach out and try to integrate people if they haven't committed any crimes or that can't be proven. They need to be reintegrated. We need to tackle those preachers who radicalize them, and we need counter-speech, but effective counter-speech. So we need to find people who returned and who publicly speak out against that.
Glenn, you said the bigger challenge is that even if you know that these people have returned and you know who they are, you don't really know how and when they would attack. What should America be doing in order to deal with that?
Yeah, well, this is the tough question, and one that my answer, as you pointed out, does not satisfy many people who say, well, failure is not acceptable, therefore we choose someone who will do something else. You have to have the resources to essentially monitor at all times people who are of concern, and jihad, someone who has been a jihadist, for whatever his motivations, is a legitimate, legitimately of concern. And then you have to infiltrate their lives, frankly. The longer-term problem that Mr. Hale addressed, absolutely one must do this, but that's literally a multi-generational enterprise. It is even larger than anything that Germany or the United States can do, because we're dealing with the consequences. Jihad fundamentally is a consequence of civilization in turmoil from globalization and modernization. Those changes and currents will not change. We have to move through this but it's a multi-generational issue. Just as Europe struggled with anarchists who were killing kings and blowing up train stations in the 1880s because of industrialization, so now we are dealing on the globe with jihad, which is the result of the effects of the modern world on traditional Islam.
All right, that's deep analysis there, but I certainly hope there are some quicker measures that our governments can take in order to deal with this. I'm going to wrap up the debate there. I'm sorry, Sanjay, we couldn't come to you, completely ran out of time. We're going to take a short break, and then we come back to you with the second topic we're discussing tonight, that on personal law in India and in South Asia. Stay with us.